Threats of violence against presidential electors cast a cloud over the typically mundane Electoral College process earlier this week. Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs said the state's 11 electors had to hold their proceedings at a secret location. It's just the second time the Grand Canyon state backed a Democrat in the last 70 years. Meanwhile, senior leaders at the Michigan State House had to reprimand a lawmaker who suggested there may be violence at their electors' meeting. A small group of pro-Trump demonstrators stood outside the state capitol in Lansing as police escorted electors to cast votes for President-elect Biden. And in Houston, an ex-captain in the city's police department was arrested for allegedly running a man off the road and threatening him at gunpoint. According to the Texas Tribune, he was hired by a GOP activist group to investigate baseless claims of widespread voter fraud. For more, I want to bring in Houston's Chief of Police Art Acevedo. He's also the president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association and an advisory board member for the Voter Protection Program. That's a nonpartisan initiative seeking to ensure safe and secure elections. Chief Acevedo, welcome. What do you see as the reasons behind the spike in election-related threats against officials nationwide?
Well, I think there's just a lot of rhetoric by elected officials about the veracity of the vote, and sadly, despite that narrative, we haven't seen, the courts haven't found any type of widespread voter, irregularities, voting irregularities, and I think that that's helped fuel the frenzy of inappropriate conduct, in some cases, violence by people in this country.
Well, Chief, we mentioned that incident in your home city. What are you doing locally that you believe can translate nationally?
Well, first of all, the Houston Police Department and our colleagues across this area and the state are actually paying close attention to threats, taking threats seriously, and along with our prosecutors, we're actually conducting investigations and holding people accountable. We cannot tolerate folks committing acts of violence or threatening acts of violence against individuals because of a vote or because of the role they play as government officials in terms of what they do for, or the role they play in the voting in this country and elections in this country.
Well, President Trump says he's dedicated to law and order. He's long condemned those who protest against him as quote-unquote thugs. But as we discussed with Eugene Scott earlier in our show, he's often silent when violence occurs among his own supporters, as happened this weekend in Washington. What's the role you think Republicans and the president can play in helping law enforcement curb violence among agitators?
Well, I think that violence, regardless of the ideology that inspires that violence, has to be condemned at the highest levels of government and at all levels of government. When we fail to do that, we not only put our communities at risk, we put our police officers at risk and our first responders at risk. And I think that all Americans should stand up and condemn violence. This isn't a third world country. This is the United States of America. Our elections are a beacon and an example for the rest of the world. And when folks start committing acts of violence or threatening violence, it's important for all patriots to stand up against it, condemn it, and for law enforcement to be vigilant and actually investigate and bring folks that are doing that to justice.
Do you believe that election-related threats are going to increase as we go forward?
Well, I can tell you that this has been an election cycle like no other. I've never seen the amount of anger and conspiracies and violence that we've seen in our country, and that should be a cause for concern for all Americans. It's important for all of us to come together and realize that we need to be unified as a nation, and we need to stand up against violence, because when we fail to do that, we put all of our communities at risk. And if we care about law enforcement, we care about the men and women in blue, we have to condemn it as peaceful, law-abiding Americans, because our officers deserve that, and they deserve to be safe, as well as the communities that we serve.
I want to ask about President-elect Biden. He's opposed defunding the police, as some of the progressive members of the Democratic Party have suggested. However, budget cuts are likely on the horizon across the board in major cities because of the shortfalls from the coronavirus. What do you want to see from the incoming Biden administration to make sure that police departments don't fall victim to massive cuts?
Well, I think it goes beyond the police department. It goes to the communities that we serve. We want the communities that we serve across this nation. This is the most diverse city in the nation here in Houston, Texas. My black community, my brown community, my poor communities, including poor white communities that disproportionately are impacted by crime in this nation, they don't want less policing. As a matter of fact, when you talk to them and go in those communities and visit those communities, they want better policing. And so it's important that Congress and the incoming administration and the president-elect understand the needs of the community, and most importantly, the fact that COVID is a three-pronged threat to the American people. It's a public health threat, the economic threat, and the public safety threat that comes with the impacts of the depressed economy. And so we need to make investments. We need help. We need a second iteration of the CARES Act, because our first responders in the communities that we serve, including small businesses, seriously are being impacted by the economic downturn that COVID has led to.
Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Chief Acevedo, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great night.